Just going to be like a director or something. Everybody different. They call it yeah, no, she doesn't get out. I'll let you know.
He has a big website down in San Francisco where he has a dispensary and he's really promoting it. He's a Buddhist. He's somehow in and you know, he's been fixing up his property because of fire. My feeling is
You guys close the door behind you.
whatever you want to do with it, you know, the same way that, you know, should be regulated like we do. But commercial growth is
Yes, she is. I can't read it to
How you doing?
Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. We'll have a roll call. Kim Scott. Not here. Matt Fogarty.
Here.
Michael James.
Here.
Cindy Robinson. Debbie Thompson.
Here.
Kevin Goss is absent. He's burying a pig. And Jeff Ingles here. That's me. I want to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. I thank you all for coming out. It's our 5th on-the-road public meeting. Lori's district. Thank you, Lori.
Your district too.
Some of mine. This meeting is solely intended for public input, so we'd like to hear from all you guys. And this is your county, and your concerns matter to us a lot. If you don't want to speak tonight, you know, please email Randy at the planning department. Write them a letter. Any way you can communicate, that's fine. I know a lot of people aren't, you know, real comfortable with public speaking like me. So, but we do want to hear from you, and that's the whole idea of these meetings. So right now, Randy Wilson is going to do a short presentation And then after that, I'll spell out the rules of the meeting tonight. So go ahead, Randy.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. So, as Jeff indicated, this is the 5th outreach meeting we've had. We've had one in Greenville, Chester, Gray Eagle, and Portola, and we're wrapping up the final one tonight. So, just an overview of my presentation, a little bit about the cannabis ordinance development process, cannabis-related issues, some about the new state regulations, MRSA, medical, and Prop 64, which have been combined into an acronym I'm not even capable of saying right now. State agencies regulating cannabis activities, brief overview of the draft ordinance, and some key discussion points. So the Cannabis Working Group was appointed by the Board of Supervisors. There's one member from each group. They're volunteer. They do not get paid for attending the meetings or the mileage to go to the meetings all over the county. The Cannabis Working Group has been developing in a public forum in the Board of Supervisors room a draft ordinance. And that's, maybe it's not liking me, a draft ordinance, and you'll find copies on the table back there. There's also copies on the website, and because I have internet tonight, I'll visit that website a little bit. These are public outreach meetings and comment meetings within each supervisorial district. There is a need potentially to apply for a local permit to apply for a state permit. Local jurisdiction's sort of in control of this, and we really don't want the state to control our permitting processes. So if the county has a permitting process, then the state has to respect that before the state permit is issued. The Cannabis Working Group will be making revisions based on public input. I can tell you Senior Planner Becky Horan, who will be writing down some of these comments, has been collating the comments from all these meetings. Also, I want you to know there's a camera going on over here by the sound system, and it's recording the meetings. And as soon as IT's managed to get one of them on, and they'll need to put all the rest of the meetings. So you can watch these meetings again if you want. And so the Cannabis Working Group will then make recommendations, and they'll do that in a public format where they'll discuss this and the public can have input. And then the working group will make a recommendation to the Planning Commission, who will also hold public meetings on the draft ordinance, and the Planning Commission will then make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. Next. The Board of Supervisors will then approve a draft cannabis ordinance for CEQA, or California Environmental Quality Act review. So this is a sort of a long, drawn-out process where you have the working group developing an ordinance, making recommendations. The Planning Commission will then take that, hold public hearings, make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, and then we go through California Environmental Quality Act review on that draft project description. All along through these processes, revisions to what you're seeing in that ordinance tonight are very likely to happen. And so it's an ongoing public input process with revisions. Once the CEQA review is conducted, the CEQA review could again drive more changes to the ordinance. Significant impacts would cause changes to the ordinance in that review. And then finally, the Board of Supervisors adopts a cannabis ordinance. Staff recommends that cannabis activities be taxed at the local level and that a general tax measure be passed by the voters. What the staff is saying is if the board chooses to enact a cannabis ordinance, it should be subject to approval of a successful tax measure. No tax measure by the voters. If the voters don't like it, no ordinance. That's staff recommendation. Again, this is kind of a general overview of the process. Public hearings will be held by both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. as well as this group will have, when they make their hearing, that'll be another public meeting. Changes to the draft ordinance are always possible. An important point to remember in all this, the Board of Supervisors has authorized the development of a cannabis ordinance, but is not bound to approve such an ordinance if the board so chooses. So in the end, they could get through the seeker review and still say no to an ordinance. The Board of Supervisors did hold 2 public hearings regarding placing a moratorium in place a few years back, but did not impose a moratorium to prohibit cultivation activities.
Smells like people thinking.
Cannabis cultivation has been illegal and has not been regulated in the past by either the state or the county. Cannabis has not been taxed. The state regulations will now provide a tax, but the local jurisdictions can also, through a tax measure approved by the voters, tax cannabis. Cannabis grows have been hidden in remote locations. There has been environmental degradation, cartels and violence. One of the things we have in this county is illegal cartel growth on the National Forest. I just heard of a recent bust by the Sheriff's Department in the Little Grass Valley area, a huge bust that was probably cartel related. That was in Plumas County. No permitted cannabis dispensaries in Plumas County. So we've never had an ordinance, so we don't have any permitted dispensaries. No permitted cannabis manufacturing operations in Plumas County, again, because we don't have an ordinance. And with an ordinance like this, neighborhood compatibility issues with cultivation and cultivation activities is paramount. That's why it's a zoning code ordinance. So compatibility. New state legislative regulations, MRSA and Prop 64. MRSA was passed by the state of California and it regulates medical cannabis. Prop 64 was passed by the voters in the state of California in November and it regulates recreational cannabis. The state has brought together both of those laws into new legislation. It's cleanup legislation. It's over 100 pages long. And I'll be honest with you, I still haven't digested what it all means. Also, the state of California, when they pass legislation, then they go through an official rulemaking process. They started that process before they brought the two, MRSA, medical and recreational, together, and then pulled back, and now are saying they're going to issue emergency regulations because I don't think they're going to miss that January 2, 2018 deadline to start issuing permits. I think the Nevada example will demonstrate California doesn't want to miss it. What that does is it leaves a lot of jurisdictions in the lurch because they haven't finished their ordinances. Prop 64 in this county passed by 51% vote. Both laws regulate cannabis. Under both laws, local permits or licenses are required should we have a license procedure in this county. And again, I don't advocate we give our authority to regulate this to the state. State agencies regulating cannabis. The Department of Fish and Wildlife will be involved in the permitting. The Regional Water Quality Control Board has already issued draft waste discharge permits. The Department of Food and Agriculture is the state agency assigned to issue cultivation permits. It is possible that they could contract with the local ag commissioners for that issuance of those permits. I don't think we know that at this time. The Department of Public Health will be issuing the manufacturing permits. The Bureau of Cannabis Control, that's the new name. It went from Bummer to another name to Cannabis Control, will issue the dispensing permits. The Department of Forestry and Fire Protection in this county will have a big role because if you're going to cut down merchantable timber, you're going to need a permit from CAL FIRE, and they're all these state agencies sort of act as an enforcement for the local, because if they're violating state law, the state agencies will get after them. And we have worked with CAL FIRE on a violation just recently for a cannabis grow. They all have separate permit requirements and fees, so getting into the cannabis business, commercial cannabis business, won't be exactly cheap. And if cannabis is locally permitted in this county, likely the planning department, building department, and environmental health and agricultural commissioners departments will all be involved, and all probably have some sort of fee schedule for our work. So at this point, I'm going to back out of this, and it wants me to do something I don't like, but I'm going to do it. So I showed you a map of the overall zoning of the county, and this is generally the area we're in. And I'll zoom in a little bit, just on Quincy area, the American Valley. What you see, that blue line that's the town of Quincy is designated on the Plumas County General Plan. The hatched areas are potential expansion areas for the town of Quincy, but they're not there yet, so they're forward-looking. Then zooming out, you'll see that the general plan has designated places: Tollgate, Meadow Valley, Sloat, Greenhorn, in the canyon. There's some other, and these are community places. Whoa, why'd you do that to me? Because it could. Give me a second. It said that the county got small. No, it's not.
You're on the Zoom out.
No, I'm trying. Okay, so kind of back to where we started. All right, so you can see the town of Quincy, and I'm going to zoom in again just on Quincy. And I'm going to turn on the zoning. So what you see here, the lime green are ag preserve lands, and you can see there are a few of them in American Valley. You can also see the community, and I'll zoom in tighter on Quincy in a little bit. But around in this part of the county, we have a lot of other zoning. We have S1 and S3. TPZ is timber preserve zoning. Timber production, timber preserve, timberland production. The ordinance does not allow cannabis cultivation as it stands right now on TPZ lands. And I was thinking about that. When you think about the Emerald Triangle, Humboldt, and those counties, I think what they're wrestling with is how to deal with cannabis cultivation on timber production lands. I don't know that for sure, but I think they are. Here this group and staff have not recommended that. So let me zoom in a little tighter on Quincy. So what you're looking at now is basically Quincy and East Quincy's to the east here. The residential areas are zoned blue, and that would be our single-family and single-family residential, smaller lot sublands. In and around you see the core commercial area, downtown area is commercial. It has a kind of a mix of C1 and C2 and C3 zoning. And just off of that, you'll see some gray areas, and that's multifamily. Radio Hills zoned R10, but you can see that we have agricultural lands out by the airport, some industrial lands by the airport, industrial lands by the mill. And again, in East Quincy, you can see all the blue, the residential type lots. I want to show you one other thing, if I can get it to go out. I'm going to turn off the zoning. And I'm going to turn on the National Wetlands Inventory. So those green areas are kind of the first test of whether those properties have wetlands on them. And I can tell you that the Water Quality Control Board is not going to issue any permits on wetlands. So that is a natural constraint that's going to happen. Other areas of the county have a lot more wetlands, but this is the wetlands that exist in the American Valley. This is not to say that they are wetlands. It's not to say that there aren't more wetlands. It's the first test of wetlands. And of course, those are our agricultural properties where that shows up. And of course, general forest is generally national forest land. You can see some TPZ, you see some inholdings. So it'll kind of give you the idea of the zoning in the American Valley. So the objectives of the ordinance is to effectively address neighborhood compatibility issues with cultivation and cannabis-related activities, set standards as allowed under state law for personal recreational cannabis cultivation. So right now, under the recreational cannabis laws, every resident or residence, or if you have a house on a piece of property, if there's 2 adults in there, you can't double up. You can have 6 plants. Everybody can do that. The only thing that a local jurisdiction can do is perhaps limit the number of outdoor plants and how those outdoor plants are cultivated with fences around them and everything. But they can't stop the 6, we can't stop you from growing 6 plants under the recreational if it's in your house. I think currently right now they're saying 3 plants outdoors and small. They have a mix in the ordinance of how to grow recreational cannabis on a personal level. And this is not for sale, it's only for personal use. A lot of this ordinance deals with commercial cannabis cultivation and commercial cannabis activities. So it sets standards for commercial cannabis activities, including dispensaries, manufacturing, cultivation. It does provide a pathway for legal cultivation on private lands to become